On this Wednesday night, COVID-19 vaccine vials and dosage difficulties. Why precious doses are being wasted.
We're short on vaccine.
And the vital equipment needed to stop it. America's new president targets climate change.
And it's time to act.
His goals for a greener future and how it aligns with Canada. A murderous plot foiled. New details about a potential violent attack against Newfoundland and Labrador politicians. Plus, the pandemic's toll on teenagers.
It has been pretty frustrating.
The stress, struggles, and solutions.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with some rare good news about COVID-19 numbers in Canada. It appears tougher restrictions are having an impact. Overall, the number of Canadians testing positive each day has begun to drop. Ontario, for example, reported 1,670 new infections today, and that is the lowest daily case count since late November. Here is the picture across Canada, adjusted for population. The three prairie provinces, led by Manitoba, have the most active cases per capita, though case counts have been dropping there too in the last few weeks. Underlying those numbers, though, are some troubling indicators. Hospitalizations remain much higher than during the first wave, and more than 100 Canadians are still dying of COVID-19 every day. 165 deaths were reported just yesterday. Add to that the highly contagious new variants, and Canada is at a precarious point. No one knows yet how widely those variants are spreading. If they take hold, like they have in other countries, case numbers could explode. And Canada's already sluggish vaccine rollout is facing another hurdle. Pfizer BioNTech wants Health Canada to stretch the number of doses in each vial from 5 to 6. The company says that change would help minimize vaccine wastage. As Abigail Bimman reports, it's not that simple.
This is a standard syringe.
When you depress it all the way down, and a lot of these, there's just a little bit of space left. You were never meant to inject that last little bit into the person's arm. It's just a bit of dead space.
And this is what's called a low dead space syringe.
You really do draw up exactly the volume that you need, and you inject all of it into the person's arm. Your measurements are a lot more precise.
Pfizer wants Health Canada to approve a change to its vaccine labels to show each vial has 6 doses instead of 5, and tells Global News while a low dead space syringe will work for 6, with a standard syringe, there may only be enough room for 5 doses. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration and Europe approved a similar request. In total, Canada has bought more than 145 million syringes. 37.5 million of those are low dead space ones, but by deadline, the procurement department wouldn't answer how many have arrived.
They're called a niche market, right? This is a type of syringe that we do sometimes use, but it's not commonplace. This is not a syringe that we would have expected to be planning for using. This really was a bonus.
Syringes or no syringes, we're short on vaccine. And even if we're able to squeeze out one more dose per vial, we still need vials. And so I think that always remains front and center, is we need to do whatever we can to procure more supply.
On the question of whether Canada will end up paying the same amount of money for less product, the government didn't comment by deadline, while Pfizer tells Global News the agreement is based on doses and not vials, and they will fulfill the commitment in line with Health Canada approved labeling. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Vaccine shortages mean Canada's rollout isn't happening as originally planned. Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller said today the government is still committed to immunizing 75% of people in the territories before April. And he's urging provinces and territories to keep Indigenous people as a top priority for vaccines.
We know that Indigenous populations, we have the numbers, we have the casualties to prove it, are 3.5 times to 5 times more vulnerable to COVID. So when we talk about timing and vaccine deployment, every day counts.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is again reassuring Canadians about vaccine deliveries.
J'ai parlé à Ursula von der Leyen, la présidente de la Commission.
During question period today, Trudeau said he's spoken with the President of the European Commission about threats to control exports of vaccines produced in Europe. Trudeau says she assured him measures to track vaccine exports will not affect Pfizer, BioNTech and Moderna deliveries to Canada. The EU wants pharmaceutical companies producing COVID-19 vaccines to register any exports of doses from Europe. A Canada Post worker in Ontario who contracted COVID-19 has died. The man has not been identified and his exact cause of death hasn't been confirmed. He was a night shift worker at a Canada Post plant in Mississauga. The union representing postal workers told Global News night shift employees were not required to be tested for COVID-19, but this man got tested anyway. He had not worked at the site since January 18th. 224 cases of COVID-19 have been confirmed at the same facility since the start of this year, and more than 4,500 people work at the plant. At least 350 employees and contractors have been told to self-isolate for 2 weeks. There is more turbulence tonight in the Canadian airline industry. Air Transat has announced it is suspending all flights from Toronto and some from Montreal until April 30th because of falling demand. The airline says new federal measures requiring travelers to test negative for COVID-19 before flying to Canada have had a major impact on bookings. In the UK, more than 100,000 people have now died of COVID, and there's intense pressure on Prime Minister Boris Johnson to do more to protect lives. He announced today tighter restrictions. Travelers, including British citizens who return from countries where new variants pose a risk, must quarantine in a hotel at their own expense for 10 days. And everyone booking a trip out of the country will be interrogated about their reasons.
I want to make clear that under the stay-at-home regulations, it is illegal to leave home to travel abroad for leisure purposes. And we will enforce this at ports, at airports, by asking people why they are leaving and instructing them to return home if they do not have a valid reason to travel.
The UK government has already banned travel from 22 countries where it's known variants are spreading, including South Africa, Portugal, and Brazil. Also today, the Prime Minister said schools won't reopen in England until March 8th at the earliest. In the U.S., President Joe Biden's administration gave a frank update today on the projected course of the pandemic there. As many as 90,000 more Americans are expected to die of COVID-19 in the next 4 weeks. That is a startling number. There are indications new case numbers aren't rising as fast as they were, but that could change quickly as new variants spread. And as Jackson Proskow reports, vaccines aren't rolling out fast enough.
The first pandemic briefing from the Biden administration,
right now, I want to level with the public,
delivered a sharp dose of reality.
It will be months before everyone who wants a vaccine will be able to get one.
The U.S. faces problems with vaccine supply and distribution, and a shortage of medical professionals to put needles into arms. The new administration has secured hundreds of millions of additional doses. Experts say the plans are not ambitious enough to vaccinate 250 million adult Americans by summer. The current vaccination rate would have to triple.
That's 100 million immunizations a month, 3 million a day. So that's the kinds of numbers I think we have to get ahead of these new variants.
Those new virus variants have the White House alarmed.
We have to be concerned looking forward at what the further evolution of this might be.
The more contagious UK variant is now in 26 states and could be the dominant strain across the U.S. by March.
As transmission really starts to go up, what you're going to see is more and more Americans are getting infected, and therefore more will die. And the longer you let this go on, the more likely it is you're going to get variants that might even resist the vaccine.
Case counts are starting to fall from a peak of near 250,000 cases per day to around 160,000 per day.
Though I am encouraged by these trends, our case rates remain extraordinarily high.
Daily deaths have never been higher. 80,000 lives lost so far in the month of January, and that many more expected in the coming weeks.
479,000 to 514,000 COVID-19 deaths will be reported by February 20th.
Experts warn the only way to change course is a dramatic change in attitudes, more masks and fewer interactions, measures to slow the spread and save lives between now and widespread vaccination. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
President Biden is moving ahead on another top priority for his administration, addressing climate change. Biden says the U.S. has already waited too long and that America must lead the global response. He is making climate change both a national security and a foreign policy priority. And as Eric Sorensen reports, that puts the U.S. into closer alignment with Canada.
No single heat wave or flood, and not one wildfire or calving glacier proves climate change. But the accumulation of evidence is so overwhelming that the political will to act worldwide may have just reached a turning point.
It is an existential threat.
A new U.S. president willing to put the might of the world's biggest economy and the second biggest polluter behind sweeping changes. An executive order from Joe Biden will freeze new oil and gas leases on federal lands and offshore, a plan to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies and to invest in green innovation and jobs, including a doubling of offshore wind production, and making climate a core component of national security, foreign policy, and across government departments.
We can't wait any longer. We see it with our own eyes, we feel it, we know it in our bones. And it's time to act.
In optics alone, it's a 180-degree pivot from the previous administration, what many believe were 4 years lost to global warming. At a summit this week on climate adaptation, world leaders welcomed the return of American leadership.
I'd like to take this opportunity to highly commend the visionary leadership of President Joe Biden of the United States. The multilateralism, which has been in disarray during the last 4 years, is now back.
No country will be more affected by the change in Washington than Canada. Alberta is licking its wounds after Biden shut down the Keystone Pipeline, but lining up climate policies represents a glorious opportunity for a Liberal government that believes in them.
President Biden has a lot of similar priorities to this government's.
Cooperation could come in transportation, reducing carbon and methane emissions, clean energy exports, and on the Paris Agreement and new climate targets.
And it offers an opportunity for Canada to align with these efforts from the United States. These announcements also represent an opportunity for Canada to scale up its climate action.
A new UN survey says almost 2/3 of people worldwide, especially young people, want action on what they consider a global emergency. And it's the oldest president in U.S. history who plans to take that action.
We know what to do. We've just got to do it.
Eric Sorensen, Global News.
Death threats against election candidates. Coming up, the collection of weapons found on a man in Newfoundland and Labrador. There is more detail tonight about a threat to politicians on the campaign trail in Newfoundland and Labrador. RCMP allege a man intended to kill or seriously injure the Premier and other local candidates. As Ross Lord explains, the suspect led police on a high-speed chase, which ended with a disturbing discovery.
For Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey, being targeted by a man with a truck full of knives is an alarming threat.
We've seen some negativity throughout this campaign and some different, perhaps more online issues than we ever thought we would in the past. And to see an event like this, an incident like this, was very troubling to me and my family. We learned from the police that I was the likely target.
RCMP say Furey was not the only politician in danger.
The RCMP had serious concerns for public safety, including the safety of the sitting MHA for the area and political candidates.
RCMP say the accused left the community of Bond Bay in a truck, saying he was going to Deer Lake, 67 kilometers away, to stop the election. Police say they found the truck near the community of Cormac, but the driver refused to stop, continuing toward Deer Lake at a dangerous rate of speed. They say the truck stopped at a Deer Lake business that contained the office of a PC candidate. Police arrested the man, seizing 36 hunting and tactical knives inside the truck. Police say after they stopped him, the suspect threatened to execute local politicians.
66-year-old George Brake has been charged with the following criminal offenses: possession of a weapon dangerous to public peace, uttering threats to cause death, dangerous driving, and flight from police.
Furey is a candidate in Deer Lake. At the time of Tuesday's events, he was in Labrador.
It hits close to home. It makes you question, if you're doing the right thing.
Especially in a province where the fear factor is not normally a consideration for political candidates.
That's not the general status quo for our people and our ways of behaving.
RCMP say Brake is in custody. He'll be in court for a bail hearing Thursday. Ross Lord, Global News.
In France, the Court of Appeal has ruled a Canadian wanted in connection with a 1980 bombing outside a Paris synagogue must stand trial. 3 years ago, lower court judges freed Hassan Diab over a lack of evidence. The 67-year-old's lawyer says he will challenge today's ruling.
It flies in the face of the existing evidence. You'll recall that this is a case in Canada that was based on a sheer opinion, a handwriting opinion, that the world's leading experts all unanimously agreed was completely unreliable.
RCMP officers arrested Diab in 2008 at the request of France. Following a lengthy court battle, he was extradited and has spent 3 years in prison there. In 2018, French judges dismissed the case and ordered Diab's release. He returned home to Ottawa. Diab has denied involvement in the attack that killed 4 people and injured more than 40 others. Cloris Leachman, an actor who is fearless and funny, has passed away.
Do you know how to remove chocolate stains? Yes, I do. Oh, good.
Leachman started her career on stage and broke into film and television in 1947, and she kept working for decades. You may know her best from TV roles in The Mary Tyler Moore Show and The Facts of Life, or on the big screen in films like Young Frankenstein and The Last Picture Show, for which she won an Oscar. No other actress has been nominated for more Emmys, and she tied for the most wins. Leachman passed away from natural causes last night at her home in California. She was 94. Pandemic probe still ahead. A new COVID test happening behind closed doors in China. Indonesia's most active volcano, Mount Merapi, is erupting again. At least 150 people had to leave their homes, and there have been no reports of injuries or deaths. The volcano has erupted repeatedly in recent weeks. The area has been under the country's second highest alert level since November. Hong Kong is using a drastic new tactic to control COVID-19. The government has begun ambush-style lockdowns, closing off entire neighborhoods with no warning. Everyone within the area gets tested for COVID-19. Hong Kong has been struggling to contain a fourth wave of the virus. Nearly 40% of all infections there have been recorded in the last 2 months. And China is using a new kind of COVID test, one that sounds a little uncomfortable. Scientists say data has shown traces of the coronavirus last longer in the digestive tract than in the nose or throat. So China is using anal swabs to test for COVID-19. Yes, anal swabs. Only certain high-risk groups are being tested this way. As you can imagine, the invasive technique is not sitting well with everyone. China has taken other extreme measures to stop the spread of COVID-19, locking down entire cities and provinces to contain outbreaks. Tighter restrictions are being reimposed now ahead of Lunar New Year celebrations. Are the kids all right? Next, the pandemic's impact on teen mental health.
Yep, that's working. You're at your knee now.
The work never stops on the International Space Station. Astronauts Michael Hopkins and Victor Glover, who arrived there in November, ventured outside to finish installing a European Space Agency platform. It will allow astronauts to conduct science and technology demonstrations outside the space station. They worked for almost 7 hours and at one point joked they wished they could pop into the airlock for some snacks and bacon. Well, floating in space would be a welcome escape from what we're all dealing with here on Earth. The pandemic has now lasted long enough for research to be done on what all the illnesses, deaths, and restrictions are doing to our mental health. Tonight, Heather Yoriks-West looks at the impact on teenagers.
Normally, Kyra Cato is in the gym training in gymnastics more than 30 hours a week. But since November, her gym has been closed.
It has been pretty frustrating, but I try to keep a positive outlook on everything, but it gets hard.
I opened up the other night asking questions about how they were feeling, and I had a lot of responses that were actually quite heart-wrenching.
Coach Jenna Ball says many of her athletes are struggling right now with feelings of anxiety and depression, unsure of how long they'll have to wait before things start to feel normal again.
We're seeing changes over the months that we've done our study. We're seeing, and most of it
is going in the wrong direction.
A Calgary research project launched at the beginning of the school year surveyed more than 2,000 high school students in Calgary and Edmonton. In September, it found 17%, or 1 in 6, were experiencing critical levels of poor mental health. By December, when students were surveyed again, that number had risen to more than 20%, or about 1 in 5. Across the country, mental health professionals are seeing demand for their services rise. Calls to the Kids Help Phone more than doubled in 2020, indicating that not only are more young people struggling, but more people are reaching out for help.
The most important thing is that our young people are talking about what they're experiencing, and they're going through the process of trying to figure out some solutions for themselves that can help them get through this pandemic.
15-year-old Jane Sherwood says she's using art and music to get through these difficult times, and talking to her parents more as well.
I've become a lot more closer with my family through this, and so I think that we've kind of like established a new kind of like openness with that kind of thing, which I think has helped a lot.
Learning how to be resilient during an incredibly challenging time. Heather Yurex West, Global News, Calgary.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's been 76 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, the most notorious of Nazi death camps. More than 1.1 million people, the majority of them Jewish, died in that camp, just a fraction of the more than 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust. Israel marked the day with a virtual ceremony. In the UK, the London Eye was among the sites bathed in purple light. And in Warsaw, Poland, an 88-year-old Holocaust survivor laid a wreath in the former Warsaw Ghetto. Germany's president said today, "The greatest danger for all of us begins with forgetting." Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves.